So we're here at the tail end of the Sydney Mini Maker Faire, and I'm here with Daniel Green, who's been coordinating the Mini Maker Faire since 2013, I believe.
That's right.
Yeah.
So this is the fourth year we've been operating here at the Powerhouse Museum. When it was still the Powerhouse Museum, now it's the Museum of Applied Arts and Sciences, Powerhouse Museum.
Now, you've been quoted as saying in the past that the maker movement doesn't exist.
That's true.
So why is that?
Well, look, of course the maker movement exists because any kind of collective of people who come together under common interests is a movement. But when people ask me, I tell them the maker movement doesn't exist because people have been doing this stuff forever. Are you a bedroom tinkerer? Are you a backyard tinkerer? Mm-hmm. Did your granddad do something in a shed? All of those guys are makers.
Yeah.
That's right. Do you cook by feel as opposed to reading a recipe? All of that counts, and that's a big thing that we really advocate. And we hear it a lot when coordinating the fair and curating the content that comes in. Does my thing count? Is this a maker activity, or is this a technology thing, or how do I fit in the spectrum? And usually I say everything counts. The answer to your question is the maker movement, capital M, doesn't necessarily exist because it always has. It's just been something for people to latch onto in the last few years. It was an idea that existed before we started doing it here. So as an identifier, or even let's say a branding exercise, it's pretty new compared to a long history of people tinkering on things.
Yeah, so it's just basically putting a name to a face, essentially.
Just this afternoon, I had a conversation with somebody who was like, "Why do you do the Mini Maker Faire instead of just having a show or a science fair?" And I say, well, at the time that we started doing this, which was in 2013, it was really hard to sell people on that idea. They're like, "Oh, it's a science fair," but they're not necessarily scientists. In the first year, we had a group called the Vegan Tea House, who make vegan pastries and artisan teas, and that all counts. Notoriously, we struggle with food sellers. It's always hard to bring them in because, again, and that's kind of the problem with the idea of a maker movement. It's people feel it as a box that they can't bust out of.
Correct.
So,
Correct.
We've tried to be as diverse as possible. And you do see a lot of technology. You see a lot of 3D printers. We also have Jato Lion standing over here next to me. We had a fire-breathing dragon earlier today, but he built that himself, and in fact through several other channels. He's been doing that for years, for a decade. These aren't new activities, but they're new to us. And like you say, this is a really long way of answering the question. We just put a face to a name.
Photo bomb. Sorry.
Who shouldn't be turning up but Dave?
I feel small. Everyone says I'm small. I'm average. Thank you very much.
Oh, right, maybe you are average.
5'9".
I've watched enough of Dave's videos. And that's the thing. When people talk to me about the maker movement, it's go talk to Dave.
That's right.
You guys actually know things. I just put them all in one room.
So from the museum perspective, you're looking at enabling the possibilities, showing people what could be done, showing people how things could be made.
When we first started doing this in 2013, Peter Money from the Education and Digital Department, and he was lead point, and his perspective was all of the stuff that's on display here was made by makers, and the museum is very interested in not only the kind of man-made evolution of, or history is a better word, of how people lived and what they've done and the stuff that they've made. We have an Apple I in the collection up in the interface exhibit. And
which was made by a maker, wasn't it?
That's right.
Yeah.
Look at the Apple I in its horrible suitcase packaging.
And not only that, you've got an analog computer up there, which is made by a maker. Yeah.
That's right. And it's a philosophy that I share with Peter of if we're not supporting these guys, then what are we about as an institution? We should be on the forefront of advocating for makers and creators.
So do you think the museum should change its name to Maker Museum?
There are many people more qualified to answer that question than I am. How do I go?
That's good.
Sail by.
Yeah, that's right. All right. So, what would you do differently next year?
It's every year we do it differently, and every year we learn a new thing. And this year, operationally, it's felt very smooth. We are completely at the mercy of what spaces are available to, which is kind of a nice metaphor for the broader experience. Every year we strive to kind of make all the stars within the museum align a little more so that the experience is good for not only people down here, but also in the other parts of the museum. So this year we tried to put everything in 2 central locations. So like if you weren't here, you were up there.
Up there, yeah.
And for some people that's been really effective. Some people it hasn't been as effective. It's a huge day. It's the first weekend of the Sydney Science Festival, so all kinds of stuff is happening out and about. It's a beautiful problem to have. Like we weren't able to pick such a diverse range of activities that people could go and see and still be engaged in the same sort of thing. Now Microsoft are running workshops as part of the Sydney Science Festival, running introductory electronics for kids over at their store in Pitt Street as part of the Science Festival. There's a big family day at the Australian Museum yesterday, and all of those activities kind of mesh together. And so, it's nice to be able to go, well, geez, we'd like some space to ourselves, but really, you're in the middle of such a wellspring of activity in this area. And that's it's nice to be able to feel that we were part of that a few years ago.
Yeah.
And now there's much more of it. That people are now spoiled for choice.
What would you like to see more of next year?
Every year you get a different feel. In 2013 we had a lot of 3D printers, and then over time was less like, oh, that's cool, but what do you do with it? And now you've got Makerspace and Company outside. We're like, well, here's a ring that somebody has made out of iron, and I'm going to replicate that out of wax and then show you how to do it. You start to see much more craft and artisan materials with that. In fact, the thing I always look for is actually less about the technology. And I guess that's because when we first started, we really wanted to go as broad as possible. And so I want more robots, but I also want more
makers
hands-on, and artisan materials. The museum houses the largest collection of lace in the Southern Hemisphere. And we always kind of struggle to get the lace makers guilds and also just our volunteers in the Lace Study Centre involved. And it's that thing we were talking about earlier. People are like, oh, I didn't realise I fit in that. And that's the thing that we can do better. And that's the thing that I want to see more of. It's just you stop having that barrier of I didn't realise that I could be part of that.
When would you like it to become not a mini fair, but a maker fair? Not a mini maker fair, but a maker fair.
It's a hard question to answer. I actually know for a fact, we've got about 30 makers here. To be a capital M Maker Faire, you need 200 pieces of content. That's not necessarily stall holders. So that's a really difficult thing to fit in the museum. And so and like I said, we have space concerns, we have other exhibitions, and to make everything kind of align, we have to really think about what we want to do and how can we best service that community, but also service that need and still have a good experience. So last year we had the entire Mini Maker Faire was in our touring hall, which was really convenient because you could just go, all right, there it is, just go straight in there. But that posed other logistical challenges. Just incredibly loud, a lot of people left. And so to fit that much stuff in here is a real challenge. Because it's important to us that we show off the museum as a breathing space for this kind of activity. If it's not happening in the museum, then
it's not happening in the museum.
Are we still doing it?
Correct.
So it's a way. I know it's not a direct answer to your question, but it is something we're very mindful of. And the balancing act.
But you're actually thinking of moving at some stage, aren't you?
The current plan is that the museum will be moving sometime in the distant future to a site in Parramatta.
Okay.
And so that's all still very amorphous. And I'm definitely not the person to talk to about that. But that is going to happen. And so hopefully there'll be an answer to that question of how do you fit a convention or a festival in a space that's not really designed for that kind of activity? So
that's right.
I look forward to seeing what that is.
So have you been happy with the number of people that
Absolutely. We're happy that anyone comes. But it's definitely been like a really lively experience, particularly today. It's always busier on a Sunday. Yeah, I'm definitely happy.
Yeah,
with the
that's
number of
good.
people here.
All right. Thank you very much.
Excellent.
Thank you
so
much.
Nick. Thank
And I'll
for
see you
coming
next
and hanging
year.
out. I mean, you're an addition. We were talking about this yesterday.
Yeah.
It's like 50% more independent maker coverage, courtesy of yourself. So thanks for coming.
It's a pleasure. Thank you.